Welcome to Nathaneal Podcast. Today we have a very special guest. People have been waiting for this. Atlas, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Nathaniel. It's a big pleasure to be here.
And it's a big pleasure to talk to you. I just told my friends that I'll be having you in my podcast, and everyone just seems to be excited.
Let's do it then.
Yeah. So to anyone who doesn't know you, you were a former political advisor and communication strategist to a former minister in Morocco, and now you're using those skills of how you've built influence there in the political sphere here on X to build personal brands. And as your banner said, you have been building influence since 2014. I do want to like ask you about that. What does that mean? Building influence. What does influence mean for you?
First of all, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward for this conversation for a really long time. So yeah, as you said, I come from a political background, and my my whole online presence was a natural extension of my obsession with public opinion, how to sway public opinion, which was like my main KPI as a civil servant and political worker. And X is the natural extension of that. So like what I noticed was that the same mechanisms, the same type of messaging that work for a political campaign, they use the exact same stimuli that work on an online audience. And that was my hypothesis when I started working online in general. So I built my whole content strategy around those elements. And if you want, like, we could discuss this a little bit further down this conversation. So 2014 was the year I started my job as a PR advisor for my former boss, who was the Minister of Industry and Foreign Investment here in my home country in Morocco. And that was my first interaction with the concept of influence. So basically, what is influence? It's the ability to make people think a certain way, make people believe certain things, and most importantly, make people take actions in a way that benefits you as the one who is sending those messages. So one thing that was shocking to me when I started doing this thing is most advice you will see around, like when people start talking about growing audiences online, etc. It's very much like tricks and hacks oriented, and even when it's not that, it's still too tied to algorithms. It's too tied to the technology, and there is a huge part, which in my opinion is the most important one, that is like the human component of that. Like at the end of the day, if you're growing an audience, like they're fellow humans, and if you only think about the media and you're not thinking about enough about the social aspect of that, there is no way you actually succeed. Some people have a natural talent for that, other people learn it, and other people just get coached, like the clients who hire me for my expertise. So, and this is something that is not new. Like influence is a concept that, if you dig a little bit into history, you will find that in ancient Greece, in ancient Athens, which is like for the first time in history, it's the first democracy. So for the first time in history, people got to decide for important collective matters through the power of words and not the power of coercion. Like before that, and even after that, you would have some sort of monarch or some sort of political structure that would impose things on you and do as I say, or else, right? Or else you
Yeah.
get killed. And for the first time in history, Big decisions were made on the basis of how many people subscribe to that argument or that idea.
Mm.
And free men of the city of Athens, they would gather together in a place called the Agora, and for each big decision, they would argue either against or in favor of that decision. So, for example, are
Mm.
we going to war against Sparta? Are we going to trade with the Persians? Are we going to have an alliance with Thebes? And those decisions were made on the basis of which argument sounded best. So people would get in there, they would talk to the crowd, and whoever was followed by the bigger crowd, and then that decision was made. So suddenly your words became an instrument, a tool for power.
Mm.
This is how important that is. And ever since, like every politician in any democratic place, and even like dictatorships, honestly, relied on relied on this ability to make people believe certain things or make people take certain actions. And it's actually a science. Like that's what essentially rhetorics are. And we still use rhetorics to this day. Like every creator needs to have like a clear messaging to a clear type of demographics in order to attract those people and in order to make them believe what they have to preach, and in order to make them, if it's a business, to buy from them. If it's a politician, it's about votes. If it's a cause, it's about subscribing to that cause. And that's how important being able to formulate your messages and your ideas properly with the right frames allows you to access that type of power. So it brings you political power, it brings you revenue for your businesses, and it gets your like causes that are dear to you. It brings them forward, and they become part of the collective conversation.
Yeah, I just I wanted to talk about what you just mentioned. How a lot of people on X are kind of obsessed with the algorithm, like they're looking for hacks and tactics. And you talked about it's still a human game in a way. And I'm reminded of a guy from Greece. You might have heard of him. His name's Aristotle. He said that by nature, man is a political animal or something like that. And like in a way, we're always influencing each other into doing what we want to do.
Yes.
So, and he is also, if I'm, and correct me if I'm mistaken, because I might be wrong. He also was the founding father of what you said, the strategies
Rhetorics.
and rhetorics, right? So, I'd like to know more about the concept of rhetorics in your perspective.
Okay, so it's interesting that you brought like, that's an excellent question, and it's interesting that you brought Aristotle up because he compiled that knowledge, and
Yeah.
he asked himself at some point, so what makes people influenced?
Mm.
And he identified three main pillars of messaging and speech that have an effect on a crowd, on an audience. And those three main pillars, I'm going to add like another one that is more of a bonus that I think most people overlook. So the first one is what Aristotle calls your ethos. And your ethos is basically your legitimacy to talk about what you're talking about, right? If you're defending a cause or against something else, what makes you legitimate to talk about it? And that could be your life experience, that could be your studies, that could be your degrees, that could be your relationships. But people need to understand that you know what you're talking about.
Mm.
Otherwise, there's no point. Another example of that, and that's something that people usually understand pretty easily. If you're if you're going to a doctor because you're sick, you expect that doctor to have like his like diploma, right? Like you expect a
Yeah.
legitimate doctor. Otherwise, you would go to your barber because your ears hurts, and that doesn't happen. If you have a skin condition, you go to a dermatologist, right?
Mm. Mhm.
So it's pretty much the same thing. If you have a problem with the law, you go to a lawyer. If you have a problem with your car, you go to a garagist. So like it's the same concept. You have to develop an ethos that gives you legitimacy to talk about what you're talking about. But that's only one aspect of the ethos. The second aspect of the ethos is when you are presenting or preaching whatever you're defending, people need to feel that you have benevolent intentions. If you're an example, like a good counter example of that would be like Martin Shkreli, who had like a bad ethos because people knew he was trying. You know who I'm talking about, right? The guy.
No, I apologize.
Well, it's this guy who had he basically acquired the license to produce a medicine, right? And he was like exclusive to him, and he raised the prices by more than 300%. So like it was basically a money grab, and his ethos was bad because whatever he would say, people would think, well, this guy doesn't want what's good for me. And like it's part of the human nature. Why would I listen to you and follow you and do what you are telling me to do if I know your intentions are bad towards me? Right? So that's the first pillar. And that's ethos. The second pillar is what Aristotle calls your logos. And your logos is basically the reasoning. So basically, you're there to solve a problem. And you advocate for a way of solving the problem because you think like that is the way to solve that problem. It's your mechanism. If we're talking business terms, it's your mechanism. It's a series of causes and consequences that lead to a desired outcome, right? So that thing needs to make sense. It needs to make rational sense. If you're defending a cause, but like your mechanism doesn't make sense, nobody will believe in you. And like we're in the business of changing people's beliefs. So that's the second pillar. The third pillar, which is probably the most overlooked one, is what Aristotle called the pathos. And pathos is your ability to create that emotional bond with the audience. And it's an extremely powerful tool in order to stand out. You share a feeling with them, and that goes through anger, it goes through fear, it goes through empowerment. There is a plethora of messages that spark different emotions in your crowd. Like, and this is like the human element that most miss. Like, you need to make them believe and make it a reality that somehow first their interests and yours, like their personal interests and yours, are aligned. And the second level is, and that's like the highest level, your identity and theirs, they merge somewhere. Let me give you an example of that so like it makes more sense. Take somebody like Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a billionaire. So as a person, he is in a condition that is very, very far from his average follower or his average voter, the MAGA people.
Yeah.
And yet he was still able, through Pathos, to bring all of these people together under the same banner. They share an identity. So when they share an identity, you become part of them. This is how you keep your audience loyal to you. They feel like you're one of them, and they're part of you, and they will defend you to death if you're able to put this together. And when I say death, like I'm not even exaggerating. Like there are people out there ready to take a bullet for Donald Trump. I can guarantee that.
Yeah.
The fourth one, which I rarely talk about unless it's with my clients, it's what Aristotle calls Kairos. Now, you as a person, you are not the same person you were 2 years ago, and you are not the same person you were 10 years ago, and you are not the same person you will be in 10 years from now. Your experience will change. Your values might change. So if you're a public persona, you need your messaging to evolve with you. Otherwise, you create that break, which is this is where you become inauthentic. It's not you anymore. So your messaging and your brand, it's something that is alive. It's not rigid. It's not supposed to be rigid. It's supposed to be dynamic, right? So basically, Kairos is the right message at the right moment for the right person. I think I summed up pretty much like the whole philosophy. Like you could use these three pillars and understand where to go from there. Obviously, like I'm not spilling the beans, like I'm not talking about how to actually do that. That would take me about 5 hours. Last time I tried to do that, it took me 5 days. But these are like the main, like the essentials that, in my opinion, everybody needs to know about. You need to nail down those 4 elements and have like a strategy that derives from those elements before you can think about starting a personal brand or even starting like any type of media company. Make sense?
Yeah, completely makes sense. Ethos, for me, in my language, I wrote it credibility. So to be like, ethos is when people know that they can trust you because in a way you're an expert, so you know what you're talking about. And then logos is basically if you know what you're talking about, then you should be able to explain it to me in a logical and clear manner. And then pathos, like this is one thing that you talk about too, building a cult, basically. Like you're.
Well, I stopped doing like I stopped labeling labeling it like that, but like it makes sense when you think about it. When you think about it, like any organization, like human organization, is a cult by definition. And when I say a cult, like there's all of these associations of ideas, and we think more Jim Jones more than like Jesus, but they're basically it's the same
ideology.
It's the same process, not the same ideology, God forbid.
All right,
it's the same process, right? Yeah. Organizing people around an idea it's always the same process. So you could put their sports teams, like think about the relationship a sports fan has with his team. Think about it's about like who is going to capture that identity. Religions work the same way. Nations work the same way. Right. Without the idea of a nation, there's no nation, right? So basically everything around us revolves around ideas, and those ideas, the more they spread, the more they share, and the more they transform themselves into identities, the more powerful they become in reality.
Right. Yeah, and even like ideas are more powerful than the person itself.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah. 100%. Like people die. Ideas don't die as long as they're shared.
This kind of, so just to share my own personal experience. I joined a fraternity when I was in college, and in the Philippines, fraternities are more like, we could actually be called a cult. Like it's really, I don't know if you know this poem, If by Rudyard Kipling. Okay. But there's a poem by Rudyard Kipling that I still have in mind because they made us realize that. So there's like doctrines that we need to memorize. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, but basically, if you don't memorize it, you will not be able to get inside the group unless you are indoctrinated. That's basically it. Indoctrination.
You're getting into like the actual tactics and the actual process of putting that together, which is a good thing. Like honestly, like yes, definitely. And this touches on the idea of like mimetics. Like that's what mimetics are. And essentially, you need a set. I talked about bringing to people together and giving them like a common symbol in order for them to develop a common identity. And this goes through flags, it goes through chants, it goes through rituals, it goes through basically what a religion is. Think about what a national anthem is. It's basically what you're describing there. It's
Right.
just another version of it. You could put there like gangs also. Gangs have a very strong sense of common identities. They have colors, they have names, they have signs, those weird
Right.
things they're doing with their hands. What is that? Think about it. What is that?
Symbol, like a
Symbol of belonging.
yeah.
You and I are part of the same thing, so I got your back and you got mine. Make
Right.
sense?
Yeah.
And it's very deeply rooted in human instincts, because we are social creatures or political creatures, as Aristotle puts it. And if you go back in time, like the cavemen, one guy wouldn't survive in the wild alone. They needed the tribe for security.
Yeah.
So it's part of the survival instinct. And if you think about the Maslow's pyramid of needs, the need of belonging is like a very
Yeah.
basic one.
Yeah.
We need that. We
Right
need to
after
feel,
shelter.
yes, we
Yeah.
need to feel right after basically physiological survival. How do I ensure that I keep living and I can reproduce if I'm alone and defenseless and I'm dealing with predators and I'm dealing with other tribes that want to kill me or eat me or whatever it is. So it's the same psychological mechanism that make you follow this. Like it's pretty stretched, but it's so real. The same mechanism that makes you love a sports team or being part of a religion talking about your nationality, it's the same mechanism as being part of a creator's audience, to different levels, but it's the same mechanism.
Right. Right. So, like the deep sense of the deep need for belonging of people, in a way. So you
Yes.
can, in a way, you can use that as a way to influence them to do what they want, or to do what you want.
If you don't do it, somebody else will do it. And it's a very natural thing. And as I said in the beginning of this conversation, some people are natural at that. Some people are natural. Other people learn it.
Yeah.
And most people are completely blind to it, because like it's just, I need, where's my clique? And
They're the most dangerous, in my opinion, though, because they kind of not aware of
their
that they are
troops.
actually part of a group.
Oh, you are generally very aware that you're part of a group because you can't stop talking about it. Think
I see.
about, and the difference is there are organized groups and there
Yeah.
are disorganized groups. And like since we both come like from X as a platform, as a main platform, think about creators communities versus people who talk about money Twitter, for example, as an example. Money
Mm.
Twitter doesn't exist. Like it's an idea. It doesn't really exist. It's a group of people who know each other. It has its leaders. It's the bigger accounts, and it has a multitude of smaller accounts that gravitates around those. Right.
Mm.
A more organized type of organizations would be if I subscribe to your email list and then I subscribe to your online community and I have interactions with the other members and we have
Mm.
rituals. And I could think about, like, I have a clear example in mind. Think about, who Nicolas Cole is and
Yeah.
Dickie Bush.
Yeah.
Okay, they have this thing called Ship 30 for 30, and they make people put a boat after their names on their bios, right?
Yeah.
What is that boat? It's a symbol of
It's like
belonging.
the gang.
That's what it is. That's a more organized organization,
Right.
right?
So like form in a way formal and informal organizations.
You could label it as such. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit more about what you mentioned earlier, Kairos, because that is not something that a lot of philosophers that talk about Aristotle talk about. So the right message at the right time. I really find it fascinating what you said earlier. Like, you are not the same person as you were like a day ago, and like now I'm definitely not the same person as I was 25 minutes ago after talking to you because of this. But so your message evolves. I'm curious then, like how would it be if your message evolves to the point that it goes against your message before? Wouldn't that somewhat destroy the message? Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And correct me if
Yeah.
I am understanding this incorrectly. You're talking about contradictions in the
Yeah.
ideology.
Yeah.
Well, some narratives can be solid enough to resist contradictions. I mean, like they can survive despite contradictions, and some messages cannot stand that. So I would say it depends on the level of influence and how much. I love this label. I love this word. How much mental real estate you own in your crowd's mind. How much in percentage? I would say like the higher that percentage is, the more you could not care about contradictions.
Right.
And listen to anybody for long enough, and you will spot those contradictions. Like it's who we are. Like that's schizophrenia that we're all, because like values are malleable. What can't work is when your contradictions destroy your ethos. Let me give you an example.
Right.
If well, we used kind of like traditional examples. Let us go more on the left. Okay, so let's say you're vegan. Veganism is a cult, by the way. Let's say you're vegan and you're advocating for that type of diet, and someday somebody takes a picture of you eating a good roast beef. What is that going to do to your ethos? What is that going to do to your influence?
It's all gone.
It's done. So as much as some contradictions could be like for forgiven, other contradictions are so against the main narrative, that so opposed to the main narrative, that the group cannot, it will disintegrate. If the leader is like, the ethos of the leader is too far away from his actions, it cannot work.
Right. So would you say then that the ethos is the basis of influence?
Yes, I could say that, but like all of these four elements are the basis. Like
Right.
there is no, like if you don't have ethos, you don't have influence. If you don't have pathos, you don't have
I
influence.
see.
If you don't have logos, you don't have influence.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. So having these four is the basis of influence. Of
Yes,
influence. Right.
yes. And I wouldn't put any hierarchy, but like if there is like one element of those that is like maybe less potent than the others, I would say like the the logos is the less powerful one, is the least
Oh,
powerful one.
because you can actually brainwash some people into like illogical things.
Well, think about manifestation.
Oh, things that don't make sense. Oh yeah,
It still
right.
works. It still works. Think about numerology. Think about astrology. Like those things, they don't. Like, there is no logos basis to that thing.
Right. Interesting. Wow, that is dark. Like, you can actually remove logos and it still makes sense.
I wouldn't say. I wouldn't advise anybody to remove logos, especially if you're using it for business. I wouldn't say remove logos, but I would argue that logos is probably the least important of those three. But there are at the basis of anything, of any influence venture you could have out there.
Right. Okay. I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier about X, where there's, like big craters in the middle, and then we're circling around small craters circling around that. Because one thing that you also talk about a lot is that social media is a never-ending political campaign where basically like what you mentioned earlier, Athenian democracy, where anyone can basically go in the platform and speak and argue. So now, like, I want to talk about how would you think, considering that, I'm thinking if someone is following a big creator at the moment and then they get enough influence and then use their background as leverage to overtake that creator, wouldn't that be in a way hijacking, unfair?
I'm not sure I understand what you're saying.
So for example, because we form, so imagine like a big creator has a cult and then there's a small creator there, but since we're like living in an everlasting democracy, that guy can actually overtake the bigger creator.
Yes.
Now, would it be fair for the small guy to go basically hijack the bigger creator and then use that as a way to overtake him?
Would it be fair?
Yeah.
Probably not. But like nature isn't fair, life isn't fair. If you can deal with that, you're gonna have a hard time.
So how would you deal with that as the one who owns the cult? How would you kind of prevent others from doing that to you if you were in that position?
I will not use the word cult to begin with, and
Okay.
then how do I organize it? There's a whole discipline that's called cult of personality. Your ethos, like this is why it's important to develop an ethos, a strong ethos. If the organization is tied to you and to your ethos, if you remember that merged identity I was talking about, it needs to be tied to you. Would it be MAGA without Donald Trump? Can anybody hijack Donald Trump and his organization? You can hijack the Republican Party, but you can't hijack MAGA because MAGA is Donald Trump. So when you work with the right foundations and you push towards the right thing and you have nailed down your ethos to a point where like it's the basis of your influence, there's no hijacking that could happen. You could hijack organization, but you cannot hijack an idea. And and what I'm aiming at with my whole ideology and what I'm preaching here is to make you immune to that by developing a strong ethos.
So what I'm getting from this is that you identify as the idea itself?
You should. You
See.
should. You are the embodiment of the idea. So let's think about ethos differently. Let's think about ethos differently. What makes you attached to a certain person online? Creator. Let's call it a creator. What makes you consume one creator repetitively, like again and again and again?
I respect their
Not
opinion.
respecting, consuming.
Oh,
Just opinions?
yeah, like the things that they say are very triggering. Like they it's like I can't scroll past them. I need to think when they say something.
Okay, give me an example of one. Somebody, a creator you like. Like you
Atlas.
who's your someone else. I'm probably not in the top, not even in the top 3, but like tell me.
Okay, let's say one thing that the first person that pops into my mind is Andrew Gould, copywriter.
Okay.
Yeah. When I see his content, it makes me like I always want to read it because, well, first I'm a copywriter, so
Yes.
it interests me.
Yes.
The second one is that he's credible. I mean, he's been in the game for 15 years.
Okay, let's think about this. At some point, you relate to Andrew. I love Andrew, by the way. He's awesome.
Yeah.
But there are 2 elements of it. There is the element of relatability, because Andrew is useful to you at the level at which you are with copy, right? and then you're aware that he was at your level, but now he's at another level. So he's relatable, but he's also inspiring because you want to know what he knows and you want to be in his position as a great copywriter.
Yeah.
Make sense to you? So you could extrapolate that into any niche, any creator. You need two things. You need to be relatable to your target audience, and you need to be inspiring to that target audience. It's basically the narrative of I was just like you, I had the same problem as you, and I fixed it, and this is how you fix it. Relatability, inspiration. Let me give you another example. So Alex Hormozy. Alex Hormozy is a great example. Alex Hormozy leverages two elements. Like the first one is he wears like his clothing, he doesn't dress like the typical business owner.
Yeah.
So he's more relatable to somebody, to a gym bro, or is he more relatable like to the average viewer in terms of how he dresses. But then he is an inspiration because he has his body is a status symbol and his money is a status symbol, right? So he doesn't have the need to flex. Like you won't see Alex Hormozy in a Ferrari, even though he could, right? So he's both relatable and inspiring. You could practically extrapolate that into any successful creator. And that's the narrative of most successful creators.
Right.
It's just
Relatability.
that the elements that you use for relatability and inspiration will be different depending on the target demographic that you have in mind. So, for example, I had this client. I think it was last week. I had this client who is like a very successful author, and he wanted to push his online presence forward. And he told me there are a lot of people buying my books, but I don't know who they are. And I asked him, okay, who do you write for? And he said, well, I write for my 20 years old self. And I said, dude, you're 40. So in terms of relatability, your 20 years old self is dead because in 2024, 20 year olds people, they consume different content, they listen to different music, they wear different things. So they don't relate to your 20 years old self. So an example of that, one thing that is like pop culture right now is like for younger people to watch animes. Back in the 80s and the 70s, there were no anime. So you don't have that cultural references that makes them think that you are from their tribe. Relatability.
Right.
You might be inspiring, but they don't see themselves in you. So you need to rethink your target audience. We need to dive a little bit deeper in our data. Who buys your book? It's not your 20 years old you.
Interesting. Relatability and inspiration.
And inspiration, like it relies like on different levels too. Like for example, it's basically like inspiration is signaling higher status. As simple as that. Now, how do you signal higher status? You use status symbols. But different status symbols are inspiring to different demographics. So an example of that would be if I'm trying to I would showcase an exotic car. I would show my Rolex. I would use those as elements for raising my status, right? Now, if I'm with a bunch of millionaires, if my audience is a bunch of millionaires, everybody has a Rolex, everybody has exotic cars. It's not a status symbol anymore. It might be how big is your yacht. It might be how successful your kids are. It might be like different elements. If I'm around scholars,
Right.
my status symbol will be how many articles I have published, how many books I have written. If I'm around like and different status symbols work best with different demographics. But there is always one common thread. A status symbol is something you have that most people don't. And your logos is basically the mechanism that got you from where they are to that status symbol. because that
Okay.
status symbol is supposed to represent the final destination.
Gotcha. So would you say that in a way you are selling a transformation?
That's what we're all doing,
Okay.
even
Gotcha.
you.
Yeah. I was once a night shifter. So night shifters out there.
Well, that's the origin point.
Yeah.
That's the origin point.
Gotcha. Okay. So one thing, so now we've gone through influence. For a guy who wants to get into the personal branding game, how would he, like, do you have a step-by-step way? And I don't know if you're a fan of that, because, like, again, you don't like tactics, like you like more principles, but yeah,
Please go.
go ahead. Would you have a step-by-step way on how they could create a personal brand on X?
Well, first of all, I'm not against tactics. Like they
Right.
have their place. Like if you wanna achieve something big, like you need a process, and like that's how you achieve big things. So I'm not against tactics. I just think that tactics should be a result of a well thought strategy. If you don't have strategy and you dive straight up in tactics, like you're not going to achieve much because you don't know where you're going. Like you don't have direction.
Right.
Now, a step-by-step process, like the first thing I would say is answer these three questions. First one is, what problem do you solve? What problem do you solve? Second question is, who do you solve it for? And third question is, how do you solve it? And here we touch on ethos, logos, pathos. and we're touching on targeting, which most people avoid doing altogether. When you ask people like who is your target audience, they would start giving you like, I'm targeting men from 15 to 90, and those are like very different types of people. You have subgroups in there, subsegments that are very far from each other in terms of cultural references, in terms of problems, in terms of inspirations, etc. So there's two different. That's the first thing. The second thing is you need a precise psychological profile. What are their aspirations? Who is it that they want to look like? What is their God? And when I say God, obviously it's not in a religious manner. Like who is their role model? Who do they want to be? Once you have those elements, you could project those elements with your content. If you don't have that, like don't bother at all. Honestly, don't bother. That's the first step.
Right.
The second step is to think about, okay, once we have answered those questions, it's oh, I lost my idea. No. I got it. It's once you have your target in mind, it's what's your unique value proposition? Why would answer this simple question, why would anybody listen to you? What are you adding? How are you useful? Once you have those, then we can start thinking about your narrative. What are all of these stories that you're gonna tell? What are these stories that you're going to tell that will bring people together around you and like give you the initial push? After that, we can start talking about content and start talking about social mapping and get into more tactical steps.
Gotcha.
But if you don't have that, don't bother.
So first, the foundation is problem do you solve, who you solve it for, and how do you solve it. Right?
Yes.
And this is very interesting. I want to know your take on this. How do you find your unique value proposition as a personal brand?
It could come from two things. First of all, like the same way you change and you're basically an accumulation of life experiences, there is somebody who has a problem that you have solved in a recent past. And there are a lot of these people For God's sake, we're 8 billion people. So there is somebody out there who suffers from a problem that you had not too long ago, and you have a solution to that problem. You can start with this. Second option is you do have like a very precise expertise. You know to solve one problem and you're very good at it. This is where you sell services. This is where you sell consulting. This is where you sell any type of done with you type of work or even done for you.
Yeah.
So you know how to solve that problem. You solve it. And that's your unique value proposition. And you think about all of the questions that somebody has. Like you could basically, every big problem could be broken down into mini
Smaller
problems,
problem.
smaller problems. So, and you, when you deal with those things, you're basically constituting what I call like a library of solutions. Once you have a library of solutions, that's your UVP.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm taking notes right here. My notebook is being full because this is very valuable information. So now I did want to see that step by step. So in terms of Atlas, the personal brand of Dentist Leo, what is the problem he solves? Who does he solve it for? How does he solve it? And what is his unique value proposition?
So basically, I help legitimate experts who have expertise offline put their expertise online. You know, like one interesting phenomenon that I have noticed, there are a lot of phonies out there. A lot of people who are not who they claim to be, but they're good with marketing and they're getting clients and they don't know how to fulfill on all those promises they made because somebody with a beard told them to make big promises. And legitimate experts, most of them are from generations that didn't grow up with social media, so they don't know how to use it, but they are legit and they need help with their marketing online. I help those people with legitimate expertise build their personal brands online. And my unique mechanism is that I don't give 2 cents about algorithms because I'm targeting the human algorithm. I'm using rhetorics for that. I'm using the same techniques that helped me get my clients and my bosses elected. I'm using them for experts online.
Beautiful. I remember you like this is an old tweet from you, but I saw it. It was like, what's this? I forgot the exact quote, but it's I am an ancient man with modern weaponry.
Oh, that's a very old tweet.
I saw that. I was like, that is savage.
You want to know something?
Yeah.
You want to know something? That is my favorite post ever. And I'm quite surprised that you dig that deep to find it.
I saw it somewhere. I was like, this is a gangster quote. I like to use the term gangster, but like, dude, and because it could be interpreted in many ways. Like right now, we just touched on your knowledge on ancient Greece, and like you don't even use the term psychology. You use rhetoric, which is more, it's a deeper way. I think it's still psychology.
It is psychology in many ways. It is psychology, but it's psychology applied to a very specific purpose.
Right. So, would you like to expand more on the tweet, the modern or the ancient man with modern weaponry?
Well, this is going to be, okay, sounds good. I'm an ancient man in a way, in the way that I'm not an internet native. Like I'm a millennial, right? And I grew up in a time where their technology was growing up with me, so to speak, right? So I remember the old world.
Yeah.
And I grew up in the old world. And also I'm using mechanisms and strategies that I'm applying to the new world that come from the old world. And they are proven. They have been proven themselves for tens of thousands of
That's
years,
it.
and they still work. So my weaponry is modern technology, but my methods are those of the ancient people. And also, I feel a disconnect with that might be generational, but I feel a disconnect with a lot of the values that are mainstream nowadays. Like, and I'm more of an ancient man. Like I have those, like, hold those traditional values that are dear to me, and I think this is how life should look like. But that's just me. Like, I'm not imposing those views on anybody, like a lot of people like to do. But that's who I am. Like, that's me professing who I am and what I believe in, and I reduce that to a short sentence.
Beautiful. It reminds me of a Nietzsche's quote. Like when he was cocky, he said that what a man can explain, what a man explains in a book, I explain in a paragraph, and what a man explains in a paragraph, I explain in a sentence.
That's an ego trip, right?
Yeah. All right. So before we end, this is my special question to my guests. If you could have asked, or if you wished, if there's a question that you wished I asked, what would it have been, and how would you answer it?
Wow, you want me to do the question and the answer?
Yes. Yeah, because like
I'll do
there's
it.
something in your mind right now that I know, you would wish I should have asked, but I failed to. I apologize for that.
You're trying to get. I don't know what you're talking about, but like I was about to, like, shamelessly promote myself, but please go on.
No. Like most people, in a way, have always wish to like get asked something. This is why I ask this to my guests, because
Yes.
they want to be asked something, but I failed to ask it. So I asked it. I asked them to do it.
What is the most, like, the question would be, what is the most important part of growing in influence online? And the typical answer is have better content. But there's another answer. The part that people miss is social media has two parts: social and media. People focus on media and they don't think enough about the social part. So they're trying to find ways to automate that social part, but you cannot automate social human relationships. You can't brute force yourself into having friends with using 300 replies a day. The social media landscape is political by nature. You need allies. You need people to vouch for you. And I believe people don't do that enough. Your social circle online will either make or break you. So if I have an advice, it would be friends with the right people. Be useful to these people. They will be useful to you.
Beautiful. That is a beautiful ending. So to anyone who needs help with personal branding and for social media growth, or not growth, but social media influence, better term, where can they find you?
They can find me mainly on X. My handle is @DentistLeo, DENTES, Leo, LEO. Just shoot me a DM. I usually answer people who need me.
And I think you also have a newsletter.
I do have a newsletter. Once you go on my profile, you enter your email address and you will receive me in longer form in your inbox. And I think you will like that. If you're interested in developing and growing your personal brand, I think you will find resources that will be helpful to you.
I mean, if they went to the end of this video, I'm pretty sure that they want that. So yeah, thank you for hopping in. It was such a pleasure. It was such a pleasure talking to you, Atlas, as always. See you around the timeline.